Welcome, campers, to where the firelight ends and the old legends begin. Out here, the Wendigo hunts, the Skinwalker mimics, and something unseen circles your tent. Sleep well, if you can. I started trucking when I was 20, following in the footsteps of my old man. He drove long hauls for 30 years, never had a scratch or an incident until the day he dropped dead in his rig of a heart attack outside Omaha in 2003. I was just finishing high school then, watching my future collapse as we buried him in that small cemetery with a view of the interstate. The irony wasn't lost on me. He could still hear the rumble of the semis passing by, even 6 feet under. By June 2007, I figured the road was in my blood, and I liked the idea of being my own boss with nothing but the open highway ahead. That's how I found myself behind the wheel of a 2007 Peterbilt, the payments eating half my income but worth every penny for that sense of freedom. My mother cried when I told her, said she couldn't bear to lose me the same way. But I promised her I was different. I was careful. I wouldn't push myself the way Dad did. Those first years were a learning curve steeper than any mountain pass I'd later drive. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months, all blurring together in a haze of truck stops, greasy diners, and the hypnotic white lines of the highway. I hauled everything from furniture to frozen foods, livestock to liquor. Each load had its own personality, its own rhythm and how it shifted and settled in the trailer behind me. By 2010, I had established regular routes, familiar faces at stops across 48 states. I knew which diners served the best pie, which truck stops had the cleanest showers, and which highways became death traps when the weather turned. I had a system, a routine. Wake up, check the rig, drive, eat, drive, sleep, repeat. It was predictable, safe. That changed on October 17, 2016. I was 29 then, with nearly a decade of experience under my belt and the confidence that comes with it. Perhaps too much confidence. I had picked up a load of lumber from a small mill somewhere near the Bighorn Mountains in Wyoming. The foreman was a weathered man named Russ, with skin like tanned leather and eyes that never quite met mine. As he signed off on the paperwork, he hesitated. "You taking the interstate down?" he asked, his pen hovering over the form. "Was thinking of cutting through on Route 16, I replied. "Save a couple hours." His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "Might want to reconsider. That road gets tricky after dark." I laughed it off. "Been driving these roads for years. Besides, I need to make good time on this one." He just nodded, handing back the clipboard. "Your call. Safe travels." I should have listened. The job had come on short notice, but the pay was decent enough to make the detour worth it. My usual route was through the interstate, but I had calculated that I could shave nearly 3 hours off by taking that lesser-known road that cut through a patch of rugged terrain. It wasn't uncommon for me to take these side routes. They were usually quieter with less traffic and fewer way stations. The mill was already far behind me when the sun began its descent. My truck's dash clock read 5:42 p.m. as I turned onto Route 16, the narrow 2-lane road that snaked through the foothills. The autumn daylight was already failing, the shadows lengthening across the asphalt. My GPS estimated 4 hours to reach the main highway, which would put me there well after dark. I remember checking my fuel gauge, 3/4 full, and mentally calculating that I'd be fine until the next proper station. I remember adjusting my seat, reaching for my thermos of coffee, and turning up the volume on a worn Johnny Cash CD that had been in my collection since my first year on the road. What I remember most, though, was the sense of absolute solitude as the trees closed in on either side of the road. Not the comforting solitude I'd come to appreciate in my years of driving, but something deeper, more primitive. It was the kind of isolation that reminds you how small humans really are, how vulnerable. As the last traces of sunlight disappeared from the sky, I flicked on my headlights and watched as they cut through the gathering darkness. The road twisted ahead like a black ribbon, disappearing into the dense forest that now pressed in from both sides. I'd driven through 1,000 forests before, but none had felt quite like this. The trees here didn't sway in the wind. They loomed, their branches reaching out over the road like gnarled fingers. The shadows they cast seemed to move independently of the light, shifting and dancing across my path. My radio began to lose signal, the classic country gradually giving way to static that filled the cab with white noise. I switched it off, preferring silence to that unsettling hiss. Without the music to distract me, I became acutely aware of every sound, the steady hum of the engine, the rhythmic thump of tires on asphalt, the occasional creak from the trailer as it shifted with the curves. At 7:15 p.m., I passed the last road sign I would see for miles. "Curve ahead," it warned, its reflective surface glinting in my headlights. Beyond it, the forest seemed to swallow the road whole, like the entrance to a tunnel with no promise of light at the end. I downshifted as I approached the curve, feeling the weight of the lumber behind me. The load was secure. I'd checked the straps myself, but on these roads you could never be too careful. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and you could find yourself jackknifed in a ditch, or worse. As I rounded the bend, the trees closed in tighter, creating a natural canopy overhead that blocked out the night sky. No stars, no moon, nothing but an endless stretch of darkness, broken only by the reach of my headlights. That was when I first noticed it, the silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from being alone in the middle of nowhere, but a heavy, oppressive silence that made every noise my truck produced seem unnaturally loud. The tires on the gravel, the engine's hum, even the creaking of the trailer as it shifted. It all sounded amplified, as if I were driving through an echo chamber rather than an open forest. I glanced at my watch, 7:43 p.m., still hours to go before I'd reach civilization again. I took a swig of coffee, grimacing at its bitter coldness, and focused on the road ahead. The coffee did little to settle the unease that had begun to creep up my spine, a sensation I hadn't felt since my earliest days behind the wheel. Something about this road felt wrong, not dangerous in the usual ways, no ice, no debris, no sharp drops without guardrails, but wrong in a way I couldn't articulate even to myself. It was as if the road itself was watching me, waiting. I shook my head, trying to clear away such ridiculous thoughts. Roads don't watch, roads don't wait. I was just tired, that's all. Tired and alone and letting my imagination get the better of me. That's what I told myself, at least, until I saw the headlights in my rearview mirror. The first glimpse of those headlights came at 8:17 p.m. I know the exact time because I had just checked my watch, calculating how much longer until I'd reach a wider stretch of road. The lights appeared suddenly, as if they had materialized out of the darkness itself rather than approached from behind. At first I thought nothing of it. This was a public road after all, and while it wasn't heavily traveled, it wasn't abandoned either. But as the minutes ticked by, I began to notice something odd about those lights. They didn't get any closer. They just stayed there, trailing me at the exact same distance, like a shadow that couldn't be shaken. I eased off the accelerator, dropping from 55 to 45, expecting the vehicle to catch up and perhaps pass me. The road was narrow, but there were occasional stretches wide enough to overtake. The headlights slowed too, maintaining that precise distance. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was a cautious local who knew the dangers of these roads at night, someone content to follow my taillights rather than navigate the darkness alone. Or maybe it was a highway patrol car, hanging back to observe my driving before deciding whether to pull me over. I pressed down on the accelerator again, climbing back to 55, then pushing to 60. The speedometer needle trembled as the truck protested against the sharp curves. Still, those headlights kept pace, never falling behind, never drawing closer. Just there, constant and unwavering. "What the hell do you want?" I muttered, glancing in my side mirror. The headlights seemed to flare in response, growing brighter for a fleeting moment before returning to their steady glow. It was as if whoever was behind them had heard me. I reached for the CB radio, switching it on and adjusting the squelch. "Breaker 19, this is northbound on Route 16, Wyoming. Anybody reading me? Over." My voice sounded strained even to my own ears. The radio answered with nothing but static, that distinctive electronic hiss that somehow seemed to match the rustling of the trees outside. I tried again, switching channels, but the result was the same. No signal, no contact with the outside world. I was alone on this road, alone except for those headlights. As the road began to descend, winding down a steep incline, I had to downshift to control my speed. The weight of the lumber behind me threatened to push the truck faster than was safe on these hairpin turns. I glanced in the rearview mirror again. The headlights were gone. My heart jumped in my chest. I scanned the darkness behind me, searching for any sign of the vehicle, but there was nothing, just that thick, impenetrable night. Had they turned off, taken another route? There hadn't been any turnoffs that I'd noticed. The absence of those lights should have been a relief, but instead it intensified my unease. At least when I could see them, I knew where they were. Now they could be anywhere. I navigated another sharp curve, the truck's engine growling as it fought against gravity. The beams of my headlights swung wildly across the trees before settling back on the road. And there, just at the edge of their reach, stood a figure. My foot slammed on the brake before my brain fully registered what I was seeing. The truck's tires screeched against the asphalt as it lurched forward, the momentum of the trailer threatening to push me into a skid. I fought the wheel, heart pounding, as the vehicle shuddered to a halt. There was nothing there. No figure, no person. Nothing but the empty road stretching ahead. "Get it together," I whispered to myself, my voice sounding hollow in the confines of the cab. "There's nothing out there." But as I sat there, engine idling, I couldn't shake the certainty of what I'd seen, a human silhouette standing motionless at the roadside, watching as I approached. The image had been so clear, so distinct, despite the split second I'd had to perceive it. With shaking hands, I put the truck back in gear and eased forward, scanning the darkness on either side of the road. The trees seemed to press closer now, their branches scraping against the sides of the trailer as I passed. Each scratch and scrape sent a jolt through me, like fingernails on a chalkboard. The digital clock on my dash read 8:49 p.m. when the headlights reappeared. Not behind me this time, but ahead, coming around a bend in the road. Relief washed over me. Another vehicle, another human being in this isolated stretch. But the feeling evaporated as quickly as it had come. These headlights were different. Not the standard white of modern vehicles, but a yellowish, jaundiced glow that seemed to penetrate the darkness without actually illuminating anything. And they were moving strangely, weaving from one side of the road to the other in a pattern that no sober driver would follow. I slowed the truck, hugging the right side of the road to give the approaching vehicle as much space as possible. The headlights continued their erratic dance, drawing nearer with each passing second. Then, just as they should have come into full view, they winked out. Complete darkness fell upon the road ahead. I instinctively hit the brakes again, slowing to a crawl as I strained to see what had happened. Had the other driver turned off their lights? Why would anyone do that on a road like this? The answer came in a blaze of light that erupted directly in front of me, those same sickly yellow headlights, now so close that they flooded my cab with their glow. A horn blared, loud and sustained, as a vehicle swerved around me, missing my front bumper by inches. In the brief moment that it passed, I caught a glimpse of it, an old pickup truck, its once blue paint now faded and peeling, its body pocked with rust. I couldn't see the driver through the tinted windows, but I had the distinct impression that they were looking right at me as they passed. The pickup disappeared around the next bend, its taillights glowing like angry red eyes in the darkness. I sat frozen, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. That truck had nearly hit me head on. It had been driving with its lights off on a pitch-black road until the last possible moment. It wasn't an accident or a mistake, it was deliberate. I forced myself to continue driving, my mind racing with possibilities, none of them comforting. Was this some kind of local game? A drunk driver with a death wish? Or something worse? The road continued its winding course through the forest, each curve revealing nothing but more darkness. I checked my fuel gauge, still half full, enough to get me through to the next town without stopping. I just needed to keep driving, to put as much distance between myself and that pickup as possible. At 9:17 p.m., the headlights reappeared in my rearview mirror. My heart sank as I recognized that same yellowish glow. The pickup had circled back somehow, finding its way behind me once more. This time it wasn't maintaining a distance, it was gaining, the lights growing larger in my mirrors with each passing second. I pushed the truck faster, taking the curves at speeds that sent the trailer swaying dangerously. The pickup matched my pace, drawing ever closer, close enough that I could now make out details I'd missed before: the cracked windshield, the bent antenna, the mounting rack where a rifle might be secured. The road straightened briefly, allowing me to gain some speed. The truck responded reluctantly, the engine roaring as I pushed it to its limits. For a moment I thought I might outrun the pickup, might reach the main highway before it could catch me. Then I saw what lay ahead. The road narrowed further, passing between two sheer rock faces that rose like walls on either side. A natural bottleneck, barely wide enough for a single vehicle, with no shoulder and nowhere to turn around. Once I entered that passage, I would be trapped if anything blocked the other end. The pickup was still gaining, now just yards behind my trailer. I could hear the rumble of its engine over the noise of my own truck, an aggressive guttural sound that seemed more animal than mechanical. I had seconds to decide: try to outrun it through the narrow passage, or stop and confront whatever was driving that pickup. Neither option promised safety. The decision was made for me when the pickup suddenly accelerated, pulling alongside my trailer. I caught a glimpse of it in my side mirror. It was aiming to overtake me just before the entrance to the narrow section. "No!" I shouted, but my voice was lost in the roar of engines. The pickup surged forward, drawing level with my cab. I couldn't see through the tinted windows, couldn't see who or what was inside, but I could feel their presence, their intent. Just before the entrance to the passage, the pickup swerved sharply in front of me, forcing me to slam on the brakes. The truck skidded, the trailer jackknifing as I fought to maintain control. The world outside became a blur of darkness and motion, the scream of tires drowning out everything else. When the truck finally shuddered to a halt, I was sideways across the road, the trailer blocking both lanes. And there, facing me just yards away, sat the pickup, its headlights illuminating the cab where I sat, exposed and vulnerable. We remained there, locked in a standoff, for what felt like hours but could only have been minutes. The pickup's engine idled, occasional revs breaking the silence like threats. I reached under my seat, my fingers closing around the tire iron I kept there. At precisely 9:32 p.m., the pickup's door opened. The hinges of the pickup's door whined in protest, a long drawn-out sound that raised the hairs on my arms. I gripped the tire iron tighter, my palms slick with sweat. The yellow headlights created a wall of light that made it impossible to see clearly. But I could make out a figure stepping down from the vehicle. The silhouette was tall and lean, moving with a deliberate slowness that seemed calculated to prolong my dread. I couldn't distinguish any features, couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, just a human-shaped shadow against the glare of those sickly lights. The figure took 3 steps forward, then stopped. It raised an arm, pointing directly at me. My throat constricted, making it difficult to breathe. I should run, I thought, abandon the truck and flee into the forest. But logic prevailed. Out there, in the pitch darkness of unfamiliar woods, I'd be even more vulnerable. The truck, for all its current immobility, was at least a form of shelter, of protection. The CB radio suddenly crackled to life, making me jump. Through the static, a voice emerged, distorted, barely audible, but definitely human. "Driver, stop, back, danger." I lunged for the handset. "This is northbound on Route 16. I need help. There's someone." The radio cut off mid-sentence, returning to that empty static. I slammed the handset down in frustration, my eyes never leaving the figure outside. It had moved closer while my attention was on the radio, now standing just yards from my door. The shape of it seemed wrong somehow, not in any specific way I could identify, but in a manner that registered on some primal level of awareness. A sound began to emanate from the pickup, not the engine or the horn, but something that might have been music in the loosest sense of the word. It was discordant, a jumble of notes that never coalesced into a recognizable melody, played through speakers that distorted each frequency. The noise crawled into my ears like something alive, something hungry. The figure outside cocked its head, as if listening to the sound with approval. Then it raised both arms, gesturing for me to step out of the truck. "Not a chance," I muttered, though I knew it couldn't hear me through the closed windows. I had 3 choices as I saw it: stay put and hope the standoff resolved itself, try to maneuver the jackknife truck back onto the road and escape, or confront whatever was outside. None seemed particularly promising. The decision point came at 9:47 p.m. when the figure abruptly turned and walked back to the pickup. It climbed inside, the door closing with that same protesting whine. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the pickup's engine revved aggressively once, twice, 3 times. It was going to ram me. I frantically turned the key in the ignition, the starter grinding as the engine fought to catch. Come on, I pleaded, pumping the gas pedal. The pickup's tires spun, kicking up gravel and dust that danced in the headlights. My engine roared to life just as the pickup launched forward. I yanked the wheel hard, stomping on the accelerator. The truck lurched sideways, the trailer scraping against the rock face with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. Metal tore, and the whole vehicle shuddered. The pickup missed my cab by inches, skidding to a halt where I had been moments before. Without hesitation, it reversed, tires spinning as it prepared for another attempt. I had managed to straighten out somewhat, but the trailer was still partially blocking the road. I couldn't move forward. The passage was too narrow, and I couldn't turn around. My only option was reverse, back the way I had come, with the pickup in pursuit. Reversing a semi with a trailer is challenging under the best circumstances. Doing it at speed on a winding road in the dark with something hunting you, that's a nightmare. But it was my only chance. I threw the truck into reverse, craning my neck to see through the rear window. The trailer responded sluggishly, still at an awkward angle from the jackknife. The pickup revved again, headlights blazing as it prepared to charge. What happened next occurred so quickly that my memory of it remains fragmented, like pieces of a broken mirror reflecting different parts of the same moment. The pickup accelerated toward me. I reversed, the trailer swinging wildly. There was the scream of metal on rock, the crunch of my front bumper colliding with something solid. The pickup swerved, trying to avoid the trailer as it swung across the road. A massive jolt as the pickup clipped the rear corner of the trailer. Spinning tires, flying gravel, the smell of burnt rubber and hot metal. When the chaos subsided, I found myself facing the direction I had come from. The truck and trailer miraculously aligned with the road. The pickup was nowhere in sight. I didn't wait to see where it had gone. I accelerated, the truck protesting but moving, gaining speed as I retraced my route. Every few seconds I checked the mirrors, expecting to see those yellow headlights reappear. At 10:12 p.m. I rounded a bend and saw what made my blood run cold. The road ahead was blocked. A massive tree branch lay across both lanes, too large to drive over, too heavy to move alone. It hadn't been there when I'd passed through earlier. It couldn't have fallen naturally in the short time since. The cut was too clean, too deliberate. Someone had put it there. Someone had known I would come this way. I braked to a stop, mind racing. There had to be another route, another way out. I frantically searched the truck's glove compartment for a map, finding only outdated registration papers and fast food receipts. The clock on the dash read 10:15 p.m. when I heard it. The distant rumble of an engine approaching from behind. The pickup was coming. Desperation drove me to a reckless plan. I put the truck in gear, backed up 100 yards, then floored the accelerator. The semi gained speed, the engine screaming in protest. 50 yards from the branch, 30, 10. I braced for impact, praying the truck's momentum would be enough to clear the obstacle. The front bumper hit the branch with a sound like a gunshot, metal crumpling, wood splintering. For a terrifying second, the truck slowed, nearly stopping. Then the branch gave way, breaking apart as several tons of steel and momentum proved stronger than wood. The truck lurched forward, over the remnants of the branch, tires bouncing on the uneven surface. I fought the wheel, trying to maintain control as the trailer fishtailed behind me. Through some miracle of physics or pure luck, the rig straightened out and I was free. I didn't slow down. Every curve in the road revealed new horrors in my imagination, more blockades, figures standing in my path, the pickup appearing from some impossible angle. But the reality was almost worse. Nothing, just the empty road stretching ahead, and the growing certainty that I hadn't escaped at all, that whatever game was being played, I was still very much a part of it. At 10:43 p.m., I saw headlights ahead. Not the sickly yellow of the pickup, but the clean white of normal vehicles. As I drew closer, I recognized the familiar shape of a state trooper's cruiser, parked sideways across the road with its light bar flashing. Relief washed over me so powerfully that I felt lightheaded. I brought the truck to a stop a safe distance from the cruiser, my hands shaking as I turned off the engine. The trooper approached cautiously, flashlight in hand. She was young, probably in her early 30s, with the wary expression of someone who has seen too much of human nature's darker side. "License and registration," she said, her voice flat, professional. No greeting, no explanation for why she was blocking the road. I fumbled with my wallet, producing the requested documents. "Officer, I need to report something. There's someone back there driving an old pickup. They tried to run me off the road, blocked my path with a tree branch." "Sir," she interrupted, her flashlight beam moving over my face, momentarily blinding me. "Have you been drinking tonight?" "What? No. I'm telling you, there's someone dangerous back there. They've been following me, trying to force me off the road." The trooper's expression didn't change. She examined my license carefully, then shined her light into the cab of my truck, scanning the interior. "Step out of the vehicle, please." "Officer, you're not listening to me." "Sir?" Her voice hardened. "Step out of the vehicle now." I complied, climbing down from the cab on unsteady legs. The night air was cold, much colder than it had seemed before, and I shivered as the trooper directed me to stand at the side of the road. "I'm going to need you to walk this line for me," she said, indicating a section of the road marking. "I'm not drunk," I protested. "I'm trying to tell you about a serious threat." "Sir, I received reports of a semi driving erratically on this road, exceeding the speed limit by over 30 miles per hour. Your front bumper is damaged, consistent with a collision. Now you can either cooperate with this sobriety test, or I can place you under arrest immediately. Your choice." The unfairness of it struck me like a physical blow. I was the victim here, yet I was being treated like a criminal. But arguing would only make things worse, so I submitted to the test, walking the line, touching my nose, reciting the alphabet backward. After several minutes of this, the trooper seemed satisfied. "You're not intoxicated," she conceded, "but you were definitely speeding. Care to explain the damage to your vehicle?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts into something coherent. "There's an old blue pickup, rust-covered with tinted windows. It's been following me for miles, playing games, trying to force me off the road. It blocked my path with a tree branch that I had to ram through. That's where the damage came from." The trooper's expression shifted slightly, not quite belief, but not outright dismissal either. "Wait here," she said, returning to her cruiser. I stood shivering in the cold, watching as she spoke into her radio. After what seemed like an eternity, she returned. "We've had reports of a vehicle matching that description in the area," she admitted. "There have been several incidents over the past few months. Truckers mostly, though a few regular cars too." "Then you believe me?" "I believe something happened," she said carefully. "But there's no pickup now. No one's passed this checkpoint in either direction for the past 2 hours." "It has to be somewhere," I insisted. "Roads don't just appear and disappear." The trooper's radio crackled, and she stepped away to respond. When she returned, her expression had softened somewhat. "Look, I'm not saying nothing happened, but right now, all I have is a damaged truck and a driver who admits to speeding. I'm going to let you off with a warning this time, but I suggest you get that front end looked at before continuing your journey." "What about the pickup?" I asked. "We'll keep an eye out," she promised, though her tone suggested it was far from a priority. "You said you're hauling lumber. Where are you headed?" I told her my destination, a warehouse in Salt Lake City. "Take the main highway from here," she advised. "It's longer but safer. These back roads." She trailed off, glancing at the darkness beyond her cruiser. They can get strange at night, especially for outsiders. I wanted to press her further, to demand a more thorough investigation, but something in her manner told me it would be futile. This was as much help as I was going to get. "Can I go?" I asked. She nodded, handing back my license and registration. "Drive safely," she said, the standard farewell suddenly loaded with new meaning. As I climbed back into my truck, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a small wooden figurine hanging from the trooper's rearview mirror. It was roughly carved, depicting what might have been a human form, but with proportions that seemed subtly wrong. It reminded me uncomfortably of the silhouette I'd seen earlier. I started the engine, carefully maneuvering past the cruiser. The trooper watched me go, her expression unreadable in the rearview mirror. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was saying, that everyone in this region knew more than they were saying. At 11:27 p.m., I reached the junction with the main highway. The interstate stretched before me, a ribbon of normalcy with its reflective markers and familiar signage. I joined the sparse late-night traffic, the presence of other vehicles, even just a few, providing more comfort than I would have thought possible. I checked my mirrors obsessively for the next 100 miles, but the yellow headlights never reappeared. By the time I crossed the state line into Utah, the events on that back road had taken on a dreamlike quality, as if they had happened to someone else or in a movie I had watched long ago. But the damage to my truck was real. The torn metal of the front bumper, the scratches along the side of the trailer, tangible evidence that something had occurred, something that couldn't be explained away as road fatigue or an overactive imagination. I arrived at my destination as dawn was breaking, the sky turning from black to deep blue to pale gold. The warehouse workers who unloaded the lumber commented on the damage to the truck, and I gave them a sanitized version of events, a fallen branch, a narrow escape. They nodded sympathetically, swapped their own road stories. None came close to what I had experienced. As I pulled away from the warehouse, empty trailer rattling behind me, I made a decision. I would never take that road again. No shortcut was worth what I had encountered there. But even as I made that promise to myself, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a troubling thought. What if the road wasn't done with me? The drive back to my home base in Nebraska was uneventful, almost disappointingly so after what I'd been through. I kept to the main highways, ignoring potential shortcuts even when traffic backed up due to construction or accidents. The extra hours seemed a small price to pay for peace of mind. I pulled into the trucking company's lot on October 19th, the afternoon sun glinting off rows of semis in various states of repair. Abe, the fleet manager, was standing by the office door as I backed the rig into its designated spot. His weathered face creased with concern as he saw the damage to the front bumper. "Jesus, kid," he said, approaching as I climbed down from the cab. "What the hell happened? You didn't report any accidents." I hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Abe had been in the trucking business for 40 years. He'd seen it all, or so he claimed. But this was different. "Had some trouble on a back road in Wyoming," I said finally, keeping my voice casual. "Nothing major, just a fallen branch I couldn't avoid." Abe circled the truck, inspecting the damage with the eye of someone who could calculate repair costs to the dollar. "Looks like more than a branch to me. This is structural damage." He ran his fingers along a tear in the metal that I hadn't noticed before. "And these scratches along the side, that's not from any tree I've ever seen." "It was dark," I offered lamely. "Things happened fast." He gave me a long, appraising look. "You're not the first driver to come back from Wyoming with damage you can't quite explain, or don't want to explain." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Abe glanced around the lot, then jerked his head toward the office. "Let's talk inside." The office was small and cluttered, smelling of coffee and cigarettes despite the no smoking sign prominently displayed. Abe settled behind his desk, the chair protesting under his weight. I took the seat opposite, suddenly aware of how exhausted I was, not just physically but mentally, emotionally. "Route 16?" Abe asked without preamble. I nodded, surprised. "How did you know?" "We've had 3 other drivers report incidents on that stretch over the past year. None as severe as yours from the looks of it, but enough that I've been considering blacklisting the route." "What kind of incidents?" Abe opened a drawer and pulled out a thin file. "Mac Roberts said he was followed for 20 miles by a vehicle that would appear and disappear. No damage to his rig, but he refused to take any more jobs that would take him through that area. Joey Caldwell reported a blockade of some kind, said it looked like a ritual arrangement of branches and rocks. He turned around, added 3 hours to his delivery time, and Vernon Walsh." He hesitated. "What about him?" I prompted. "Vernon claimed he saw someone standing in the middle of the road, said he swerved to avoid them, put his truck in a ditch. When he climbed out to check on the person, there was no one there, no footprints, no evidence anyone had been there at all." The description matched too closely to my own experience to be coincidence. "Did you report these incidents to the authorities?" Abe snorted. "Sure did. Local sheriff took the reports, promised to look into it. Never heard back." "I talked to a state trooper," I told him. She seemed to know something about it, but she was evasive. "That's Wyoming for you," Abe said, leaning back in his chair. "Lots of empty space, not a lot of explanations. Locals have their own ways of understanding things that happen out there." "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "Some places just have a history, you know? Things that don't make sense to outsiders but are just accepted by the people who live there. I drove those roads myself back in the 80s, heard plenty of stories around truck stop counters. Most of it's just talk, drivers trying to one-up each other with tall tales." "This wasn't a tall tale," I said firmly. "Someone in a pickup tried to run me off the road. They blocked my path, forced me to damage the truck to escape. That's not a story, that's assault." "I believe you," Abe said, raising his hands placatingly. "That's why I'm taking Route 16 off our approved routes effective immediately. No more shortcuts through that area." Relief washed over me. At least no other drivers from our company would have to go through what I did. "So what happens now?" Now you file an incident report, we get the truck repaired, and you take a few days off. You look like you need it." I couldn't argue with that. The adrenaline that had kept me going was long gone, leaving me hollow and drained. I filled out the required paperwork, describing the incident in carefully neutral terms. A vehicle had tried to force me off the road. I had to take evasive action, resulting in damage to the truck. No mention of disappearing headlights, impossible maneuvers, or figures that weren't quite right. Abe read through the report, his expression giving nothing away. "This official enough for the insurance company," he said finally, "but I get the feeling there's more you're not telling me." I met his gaze steadily. "Would you believe me if I told you everything?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Probably not, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen." He closed the file and stood up. "Take the rest of the week off. I'll call you when we have another job for you, something straightforward, on main highways with plenty of traffic. Give you a chance to get your confidence back." "I haven't lost my confidence," I protested, though it wasn't entirely true. Something had been shaken loose inside me, some fundamental trust in the predictability of the world. "Sure you haven't," Abe said, not unkindly. "All the same, take the time, rest. Try not to think about it too much." But that, as it turned out, was impossible advice to follow. I drove home to my small apartment on the outskirts of Omaha, the same one I'd had since I started driving. It was little more than a place to sleep between jobs, sparsely furnished, impersonal, more storage unit than home. But it was mine, and it was normal, and after what I'd experienced, normal seemed like the greatest luxury imaginable. I showered, washing away the grime of the road, and I hoped the lingering tension of the past 48 hours. Then I collapsed onto my bed, expecting to fall asleep instantly. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of that night on Route 16. Who had been driving that pickup? What did they want? Why target me or any trucker? Was it some twisted form of entertainment for locals with too much time and too few constraints? Or was it something else entirely, something I couldn't begin to comprehend? The questions circled in my mind like vultures, offering no answers, only a growing sense of unease. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and troubled, filled with dreams of endless roads and pursuing headlights. I woke at dawn, disoriented and unrested. My phone showed several missed calls from my mother, our weekly check-in that I'd forgotten in the chaos. I called her back, assuring her that everything was fine, that the job had just been more demanding than usual. I didn't mention the incident. She worried enough about me following in my father's footsteps without adding supernatural harassment to her concerns. The days of my forced vacation passed with excruciating slowness. I tried to occupy myself with mundane tasks, grocery shopping, laundry, catching up on TV shows I'd recorded but never watched. None of it provided the distraction I needed. On the third day, I found myself at the local library, searching for information about Route 16 and the surrounding area. The board librarian directed me to a section on regional history, but the few books available offered nothing useful, just dry accounts of settlement patterns and economic development. I turned to the internet next, using the library's computers to search for any reports of similar incidents. What I found was both disturbing and vindicating forum posts from other truckers, describing encounters on that same stretch of road. The details varied, but the pattern was consistent. Unusual phenomena, aggressive pursuit, blockades or obstacles, all occurring after dark. One account in particular caught my attention. A driver named Scott described an encounter in 2014 that matched mine almost exactly. The following headlights, the tree branch blockade, the confrontation with a pickup truck. But Scott's story went further. He claimed to have gotten a clear look at the driver of the pickup when it passed him. "It wasn't human," he wrote. "I don't mean like an alien or a monster. I mean it wasn't a complete person, like pieces were missing or added wrong. I've been driving these roads for 20 years and seen some strange things, but nothing like this. I quit the next day. Some things aren't worth the paycheck." I stared at the screen, a cold weight settling in my stomach. I hadn't seen the driver of the pickup that pursued me. Part of me was grateful for that. Another part wondered if seeing would have been better than the uncertainty I was left with. The forum thread ended abruptly, with no further post from Scott or responses to his account. I tried to track him down through other means, but it was as if he had disappeared from the digital world entirely. On October 25th, Abe called with a new assignment, a straightforward haul from Omaha to Chicago, all interstate, no back roads or shortcuts. I accepted eagerly, desperate to return to the routine that had defined my life for years. The truck had been repaired in my absence, the damaged bumper replaced, the scratches buffed out. It looked exactly as it had before my encounter on Route 16, but it felt different somehow, as if it too carried the memory of that night. I completed the Chicago run without incident, followed by similar jobs to St. Louis, Indianapolis, and Kansas City. Each successful trip restored a bit of my confidence, pushed the memory of Wyoming a little further into the background, but it never disappeared entirely. At truck stops and diners, I found myself listening more closely to the conversations around me, alert for any mention of Route 16 or similar experiences. Most driver talk was the usual, complaints about regulations, weather forecasts, family updates. But occasionally, when the hour grew late and the coffee had been flowing freely, the stories would turn darker. I never shared my own experience. The few times I'd tried to describe it to fellow drivers, the words had stuck in my throat, as if giving voice to what happened would somehow make it more real, more present. November turned to December, and the holiday rush kept me busy with back-to-back hauls. The steady work was a blessing, leaving little time for dwelling on the past. By the time Christmas approached, I had almost convinced myself that what happened on Route 16 was an isolated incident, a perfect storm of fatigue, isolation, and perhaps a genuinely disturbed local with a grudge against truckers. Then, on December 18th, I received a package at the company office. No return address, just my name and the company location printed in neat block letters. Inside was a small wooden figurine, crudely carved into a humanoid shape with subtly wrong proportions, 2 long arms, a neck that connected at an impossible angle. It was identical to the one I'd seen hanging from the state trooper's rearview mirror. Wrapped around the figurine was a note, handwritten on yellowed paper. "The road remembers." I stood in the office, the figurine cold and heavy in my palm, as a realization settled over me like a physical weight. This wasn't over. Whatever had begun on that stretch of Route 16, it had followed me home. January 15th, 2017. I stared at the figurine sitting on my kitchen table, where it had remained untouched since I received it nearly a month earlier. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, though I couldn't articulate why. It was as if disposing of it would somehow be an admission, a surrender to whatever force had sent it to me. Outside, snow was falling heavily, transforming the parking lot of my apartment complex into a featureless white expanse. Weather reports predicted one of the worst storms in years, with accumulations of up to 2 feet expected by morning. The trucking company had already called to let me know that my scheduled run to Minneapolis was canceled. I should have been relieved, a day off, a chance to rest in the warmth of my apartment, while the world outside disappeared under a blanket of white. Instead, I felt a growing restlessness, a sense that the walls were closing in around me. The wooden figurine seemed to watch me from its position on the table, its crude features suggesting an expression of patient anticipation. I had researched it extensively since receiving it, searching for similar artifacts or symbols, but found nothing conclusive. The closest match was in certain Native American traditions from the Wyoming region, protective totems meant to ward off malevolent spirits. But if this was meant as protection, why did it feel so threatening? My phone rang, cutting through the silence of the apartment. I answered without checking the caller ID, grateful for the distraction. "Hello? It's Abe." The fleet manager's voice was tight, controlled in a way that immediately put me on alert. "I know the weather's bad, but I need you to come in. Something's happened." "What is it?" "Not over the phone. Just get here as soon as you can." He hung up before I could ask anything more. I stared at the phone for a moment, then at the figurine on the table. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold ran through me. The drive to the trucking company took twice as long as usual, the roads already treacherous with snow and ice. The lot was nearly empty when I arrived, most drivers having either completed their runs before the storm hit or canceled them entirely. Abe was waiting in his office, his face grave. He wasn't alone. A man in a state trooper's uniform stood by the window, watching the snowfall. He turned as I entered, and I recognized him immediately. He'd been at the warehouse in Salt Lake City when I delivered the lumber, though not in uniform then. He'd been one of the workers who commented on the damage to my truck. "This is Trooper Marsh," Abe said. "He's from Wyoming. He wants to ask you some questions about your experience on Route 16. Marsh stepped forward, extending his hand. His grip was firm, his gaze direct. "Thank you for coming in, especially in this weather. I understand you had an encounter on Route 16 back in October." "That's right," I said cautiously. "I filed a report with a female officer at the scene." "Trooper Reynolds," Marsh nodded. "She's the one who brought your case to my attention. I'm part of a task force investigating a series of incidents in that area." "Task force?" I glanced at Abe, who shrugged slightly, indicating this was news to him as well. "Unofficial," Marsh clarified. "More of a personal project. Route 16 has a history, one that most official channels prefer to ignore. But the incidents have been escalating in frequency and severity. Yours was the most aggressive encounter we've documented in recent years." "What exactly are you investigating?" I asked. "Road rage? Local harassment of out-of-state drivers?" Marsh exchanged a look with Abe, some unspoken communication passing between them. Then he reached into his pocket and produced a wooden figurine identical to the one sitting on my kitchen table. "Did you receive one of these?" he asked. My mouth went dry. "Yes, about a month ago. No return address, just a note saying, 'The road remembers.'" Marsh nodded, as if I'd confirmed something he already suspected. "You're the fourth driver to receive one after an encounter on Route 16. The first was Vernon Walsh in April of last year. The second was a woman named Rita Chambers in July. The third was Scott Devereaux in September." "Scott," I repeated. "I found a forum post by someone with that name describing an experience almost identical to mine." "That would be him," Marsh said grimly. "He was found dead in his apartment 3 weeks after receiving the figurine. Official cause of death was cardiac arrest, but—" He trailed off. "But what?" I prompted, a cold knot forming in my stomach. The medical examiner noted unusual marks on his body, abrasions that looked like they came from branches or thorns, though Scott hadn't left his apartment in days, according to neighbors. And his expression— Marsh hesitated. The ME described it as frozen in a state of extreme terror. The office suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. "What about the others, Vernon and Rita?" "Vernon disappeared," Marsh said. "Left his apartment one night and never returned. His truck was found abandoned on Route 16, no signs of an accident or struggle. Rita—" He glanced at Abe again. "Rita's the reason I'm here. She was found yesterday, in her truck, parked at a rest stop outside Cheyenne. Same as Scott, cardiac arrest, marks on her body, expression of terror." "Jesus," Abe muttered. "I don't understand," I said, though a part of me did, a part I didn't want to acknowledge. "What does this have to do with me?" Marsh placed the figurine on Abe's desk. "These totems are warnings. The local tribes used them to mark those who had attracted attention from something that didn't belong to the world of men." "You're talking about supernatural explanations," I said flatly. "Ghosts or demons or whatever." I'm talking about something that exists in the space between what we understand and what we don't, Marsh replied, unfazed by my skepticism. Something that has been in those mountains long before the first settlers arrived. The natives respected it, feared it, learned to coexist with it by staying away from its territory. But roads cut through that territory now, bringing unwitting travelers within its reach. I shook my head, wanting to dismiss his words as the ramblings of a superstitious mind, but unable to forget what I'd experienced on that road. The unnatural silence, the figure that appeared and disappeared, the pickup that moved in ways no vehicle should. Why me? I asked finally. Why any of us? What did we do to attract this attention? Nothing, Marsh said simply. That's the cruelty of it. You were just there, passing through at the wrong time, when it was hungry or curious or bored. It's like a child pulling wings off flies. There's no deeper meaning, no greater purpose. Just the exercise of power over those who wander into its domain. So what do I do now? Wait to end up like Scott and Rita? No. Marsh's voice hardened. You fight. The figurine isn't just a warning, it's a connection. A tether that allows it to find you, to influence you from a distance. But it works both ways. It can be used to strike back. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather pouch. This contains items gathered from Route 16 soil, bark from the trees, water from a spring that runs beneath the road. Elements from its domain, bound with words of power by someone who understands these things better than I do. A spell? I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. You're giving me a magic pouch to fight off a mountain monster? I'm giving you a weapon, Marsh said sharply, the only one we've found that has any effect. Vernon had one too, but he ignored the instructions. Rita never received hers. It arrived the day after she died. What are the instructions? I asked, curiosity overcoming skepticism. Return to Route 16, bring the figurine. At the place where you first encountered it, the entity, burn both the figurine and this pouch. It severs the connection, sends it back to its domain. At least that's the theory. Theory? You don't know if it works? Marsh's expression tightened. I've tried it myself. I had my own encounter on that road years ago. Burning the items seemed to end the influence. I've not received another figurine or experienced any further incidents. I looked at Abe, who had been silent throughout this explanation. What do you think about all this? The fleet manager sighed heavily. I think there are things in this world we don't understand. I've been in this business long enough to hear stories that can't be explained by logic or science. I also think Trooper Marsh wouldn't be here if he didn't believe you were in genuine danger. The storm's getting worse, Marsh said, glancing out the window. Travel will be impossible by nightfall. If you're going to do this, it needs to be soon. You want me to drive to Wyoming in a blizzard, to perform what amounts to an exorcism on a stretch of road? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. That's insane. Maybe, Marsh conceded, but consider the alternative. Scott lasted 3 weeks after receiving the figurine. Rita, just over a month. How long before whatever happened to them happens to you? I thought of the nightmares that had plagued me since October, dreams of being pursued down endless roads by something I couldn't see, but could feel watching me. I thought of the inexplicable cold spots in my apartment, the shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source, the sensation of being observed even when I was alone. I need to think about this, I said finally. Marsh nodded, placing the leather pouch on the desk beside the figurine. Take your time, but not too much time. He handed me a card with his number. Call me when you decide. Either way, I'd like to know. After he left, Abe and I sat in silence for several minutes, the only sound the ticking of the wall clock and the distant hum of the heating system. You believe him? I asked eventually. Abe ran a hand over his face. I don't know what to believe, but 4 drivers with the same experience, 2 dead, 1 missing. That's not coincidence. And you think I should do what he suggests? Drive back to the place that started all this? I think, Abe said carefully, that you need to trust your instincts. If something's been following you since that night, you might not have the luxury of ignoring it. I left the office with the leather pouch in my pocket and a decision weighing heavily on my mind. The storm had intensified, the snow now falling so thickly that visibility was reduced to mere yards. The smart thing would be to go home, wait out the weather, think through the options carefully. Instead, I found myself driving to my apartment, packing a small bag with essentials, and retrieving the wooden figurine from the kitchen table. It seemed to grow warmer in my hand, as if responding to my decision. The road to Wyoming would be treacherous in this weather, perhaps impassable in places, but something told me that if I didn't go now, I might never get another chance. The connection Marsh had spoken of, I could feel it strengthening, like a cord pulled taut between me and something unseen. I called my mother before leaving, made up a story about an emergency delivery that couldn't wait. She worried, as always, but I assured her I'd be careful. If this went badly, I didn't want her last memory of me to be fear or concern. Then I called Marsh, telling him my plan. He offered to meet me there, but I declined. This felt like something I needed to face alone. The drive west was as difficult as I'd anticipated. The storm transformed familiar highways into alien landscapes, white and featureless. Several times I considered turning back, but each time the thought came, I would catch a glimpse of movement in my mirrors. A shadow that disappeared when I tried to focus on it, a flicker that might have been headlights but was gone too quickly to be sure. I crossed into Wyoming as night was falling, the storm beginning to abate as I moved westward, out of its path. The roads were still hazardous but navigable with care and experience. I stopped only for fuel, keeping the figurine and leather pouch close at hand, feeling a strange reluctance to be separated from them even for a moment. Route 16 looked different in winter, the dense forest stripped bare, the trees standing like skeletal sentinels on either side of the road. Snow lay in drifts where the wind had piled it, creating strange sculptural forms that in the gathering darkness resembled crouching figures. I reached the section where I'd first noticed the heavy silence at 7:15 p.m., almost exactly the same time as on that October evening. The coincidence sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. I pulled the truck to the side of the road and switched off the engine. The silence that fell was absolute. No wind in the trees, no distant traffic, not even the settling sounds of the cooling engine. It was as if the world outside the truck had ceased to exist. With trembling hands, I retrieved the figurine and the leather pouch from my jacket pocket. Marsh's instructions had been simple. Burn them at the place where I first encountered the entity. But what constituted an encounter? The heavy silence, the first appearance of the headlights, the figure I thought I saw standing at the roadside. I decided on the latter, driving slowly forward until I reached the curve where I'd slammed on the brakes, certain I'd seen someone in my path. The spot was unmarked, indistinguishable from any other section of the road, but I knew it with a certainty that transcended normal memory. I parked again and stepped out of the truck, the cold air biting at my exposed skin. The snow crunched under my boots as I moved to the front of the vehicle, its headlights illuminating a small area of the road ahead. From the truck's toolbox, I retrieved a small metal container I used for coffee grounds when camping, along with a lighter and a bottle of accelerant I kept for emergencies. I placed the figurine and leather pouch in the container, doused them with the accelerant, and stepped back. For a moment I hesitated. Was I really going to do this? Perform what amounted to a ritual based on the word of a man I barely knew, to combat a threat I couldn't define? It seemed absurd in the stark light of the truck's high beams. Then I heard it, the sound of an engine, distant but approaching. A sound I recognized, the distinctive rumble of an old pickup truck with a damaged muffler. My decision was made. I flicked the lighter, touched the flame to the accelerant-soaked items, and stepped back as they caught fire with a whoosh. The flames rose higher than seemed natural, casting writhing shadows across the snow-covered road. The engine sound grew louder, and I turned to see headlights approaching, sickly yellow lights that illuminated nothing. My heart pounded in my chest, but I stood my ground, watching as the pickup materialized out of the darkness, moving at a speed that would bring it to me in seconds. The fire in the metal container suddenly changed color, shifting from orange to a deep, unnatural blue. The air around it shimmered, as if with intense heat, though I felt no warmth from the flames. The pickup was closer now, close enough that I could make out details I'd missed before. The cracked windshield, the rusted hood, the distinctive shape of something in the truck bed that might have been a pile of branches or a huddled form. I stood transfixed, unable to move as it bore down on me. The blue flames rose higher, casting eerie light across the snow. The pickup was now just yards away, showing no signs of slowing. Then, between one heartbeat and the next, it was gone, not gradually fading or turning aside, simply there one moment and gone the next, leaving nothing but the empty road stretching into darkness. The flames in the container died out simultaneously, leaving behind nothing but ash and a faint, acrid smell that reminded me of burnt hair and something older, mustier. I remained standing in the snow for several minutes, my breath forming clouds in the cold air, waiting for something more to happen. But there was nothing. No reappearance of the pickup, no strange sounds or sights, just the ordinary winter silence of a remote Wyoming road. Eventually, I returned to the truck, my limbs stiff with cold and tension. I stared through the windshield at the spot where the pickup had vanished, half expecting it to materialize again. But the road remained empty. I started the engine, the familiar rumble providing a comfort I hadn't expected. As I pulled back onto the road, I noticed the silence had changed. It was no longer the oppressive, unnatural quiet of my first visit, but the normal silence of a winter night in the mountains. The drive back east was long and exhausting, but uneventful. No mysterious headlights appeared in my mirrors. No figures stood at the roadside. By the time I crossed back into Nebraska, the sun was rising, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. I called Marsh from a rest stop, giving him a brief account of what had happened. He listened without interruption, then said simply, "It worked then, good." "How can you be sure?" I asked. "Nothing really happened. The pickup disappeared, but that's what it did before." "Trust me," he said, a note of weariness in his voice. "If it hadn't worked, you'd know. You'd be dead or worse." "Worse than dead? What does that mean?" He was silent for a moment. "Some things are better not discussed over the phone. If you want to know more, find me when you're next in Wyoming. But my advice, don't come back. Find routes that keep you far away from Route 16 and what lives there." It's been 8 years since that night on the snowy road. I'm still driving, still hauling freight across the country in my newer model Peterbilt. I've never returned to Route 16, never even entered Wyoming if I could avoid it. Abe retired 3 years ago, leaving the company to his son, who knows nothing of what happened and prefers it that way. Marsh and I speak occasionally, brief conversations about incidents in other parts of the country that bear similarities to what I experienced. There are more of them than I would have thought, stretches of road where reality seems thinner, where things that shouldn't exist find ways to cross over. I've learned to recognize the signs, the unnatural silence, the sense of being watched, the strange behavior of light and shadow. I've learned to avoid these places, to take the long way around even if it means extra hours or days on the road. Sometimes in truck stops late at night, I hear other drivers swapping stories. Tales of phantom vehicles, impossible pursuits, encounters with things that defy explanation. I listen but never contribute. My experience feels too personal, too profound to be reduced to a tale told over coffee and pie. The memory of that night has faded somewhat, acquiring the soft edges of time past, but certain details remain vivid. The yellow headlights that illuminated nothing, the figurine with its subtly wrong proportions, the blue flames that seemed to burn a hole in reality itself. I still drive because it's what I know, what I'm good at. The road is still where I belong, but I drive with a new awareness now, a respect for the mysteries that lie beyond the reach of headlights, and I keep a metal container, a lighter, and a bottle of accelerant in my truck at all times, just in case the road remembers me again. Because that's the truth I've come to accept, the lesson learned on a winter night in Wyoming. Some roads don't just take you from one place to another. Some roads lead to places that aren't on any map, places where the normal rules don't apply. And some roads remember you long after you've left them behind. The long haul isn't just about distance or time. It's about what you carry with you, what follows you, what waits for you around the next bend. It's about recognizing that the journey never really ends. It just changes form, like headlights appearing and disappearing in a rearview mirror. And sometimes, on nights when the moon is hidden and the darkness seems deeper than it should be, I still check my mirrors more often than necessary, watching for lights that shouldn't be there, listening for an engine sound I hope never to hear again. Because the road remembers, and so do I. I never imagined that a routine delivery could turn into a nightmare. But then again, I've never been one for the ordinary. My name's Leonard, and I've been a truck driver for most of my life. It's a job that suits me. No bosses breathing down your neck, just you and the open road. The cab of my 18-wheeler has been more of a home to me than the small apartment I keep in Albuquerque. 23 years behind the wheel teaches you things. You learn to read the road, predict the weather, and most importantly, trust your instincts. I've been through my share of tough times, too. Lost my wife Mary Ann to cancer 12 years back and never had any kids. So I pour myself into work. It's just easier that way. The loneliness still hits sometimes, especially during those long stretches of highway where your mind wanders to what might have been. But I've made peace with my life. Some men aren't meant for picket fences and Sunday barbecues. Last Tuesday started like any other job. Interstate Hauling dispatched me to deliver construction supplies to a new build site somewhere in the forests of northern New Mexico. The paperwork said it was a custom home being built for some wealthy tech executive who wanted to get away from it all. I'd hauled plenty of loads to remote locations before. Nothing unusual about rich folks wanting their vacation homes in the middle of nowhere. The morning was crisp as I checked my rig. My truck, a Peterbilt I've nicknamed Eleanor after my mother, was running smooth. I'd had her for 8 years now, and we understood each other. Every squeak, every rumble, every hesitation in the engine had meaning. That morning she purred like a kitten, despite the heavy load of lumber, drywall, and construction materials packed in the trailer. Before hitting the road, I stopped at my usual diner just off I-25. Margie, the waitress who served me breakfast for the past decade, slid a plate of eggs and hash browns across the counter without me having to order. "Special delivery day, Leo?" she asked, refilling my coffee cup. "Just another haul," I said, checking the printed directions. The GPS signal was spotty in the mountains, so I always carried paper backups. Old habits die hard. "You look tired," she noted, leaning against the counter. "Not sleeping well?" I shrugged. Truth was, I'd been having nightmares lately. The same one over and over. I'm driving down a dark road and something's following me. I can never see what it is, just feel it gaining on me. I always wake up before finding out what happens. But I wasn't about to unload my personal problems on Margie at 5:30 in the morning. "I'm fine," I said, finishing my coffee. "Just ready to get on the road." By 6:15 I was heading north on the interstate. The traffic was light and the sunrise painted the desert landscape in shades of orange and gold. For the first few hours it was smooth sailing. The radio kept me company, a mix of classic rock and talk shows discussing the upcoming local elections. Normal, ordinary, comfortable. It wasn't until I turned off the main highway that things started feeling different. The state road narrowed, then turned into a county road, and finally into what could barely be called a road at all. The trees got thicker, the houses fewer and farther between. The GPS started glitching, the little blue dot jumping around on the screen before disappearing altogether. I pulled out the printed directions and laid them on the passenger seat, a relic from the old days. By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened, not from nightfall, but from thick clouds rolling in over the mountains. The forecast hadn't mentioned rain, but up in these elevations, weather was unpredictable. I switched on the headlights as a light drizzle began to tap against the windshield. The isolation started to settle in around me. No other vehicles had passed in either direction for at least an hour. Cell service had disappeared miles back. Just me, Eleanor, and miles of pine trees stretching in every direction. I checked my watch. 4:37 p.m. I had hoped to reach the site by 3 o'clock, but the increasingly poor road conditions had slowed me down. The gravel crunched under my tires as I navigated around potholes and over washouts. Eleanor wasn't built for this kind of terrain, but she was handling it like a champ. As the hours passed, an uneasiness began to creep up my spine. It wasn't anything specific at first, just a feeling like when you walk into an empty house and somehow know someone's been there. I tried to shake it off, turning up the radio, but static had replaced the stations I'd been listening to earlier. I switched it off and focused on the road ahead. The rain had intensified, drumming against the roof of the cab. Visibility was poor, and I had to lean forward in my seat to make out the path ahead. The wipers worked overtime, sweeping away sheets of water only for them to be replaced instantly. That's when I saw the turnoff, a narrow dirt path that wound into the woods. No signposts, no lights, just a gravel road leading into darkness. According to my directions, this was it. I slowed Eleanor to a crawl and made the turn. My headlights cut through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. I had to go slow. This wasn't a route meant for big rigs. The tree branches scratched against the sides of the trailer like fingernails. The rain had turned the dirt road into mud, making the tires slip occasionally. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. As I crept along, I noticed something strange. There were no signs of life. No deer, no birds. Not even the hum of insects you'd expect in the middle of nowhere. Just the rumble of my engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. I dismissed it as my imagination running wild, but still, a prickling unease settled over me. Something was off about this place. The trees seemed to lean in toward the road, their branches reaching like arms. The darkness between them was absolute, swallowing my headlights within feet of where they touched. After about 15 minutes on this treacherous path, the trees finally gave way to a clearing, and there it was, the construction site. A half-built house stood in the center, surrounded by stacks of lumber and cinder blocks. The frame of the building was up, but it was far from finished. No other vehicles were present. No trailers, no equipment. Just a skeleton of a house standing alone in the wilderness. I pulled Eleanor to a stop and shut off the engine. The sudden silence was deafening. The rain had eased to a light drizzle, pattering softly on the roof. I sat there for a moment, staring at the construction site through the windshield. Something about it didn't look right. The proportions seemed off, the angles unnatural, like it had been designed by someone who had only heard descriptions of houses but never actually seen one. I checked my paperwork again. This was definitely the place. But where was everybody? The site should have been bustling with workers, especially if they were expecting a delivery. I checked my watch again, 5:22 p.m. It was getting late, but not so late that a construction crew would have packed up and left, especially with a delivery on the way. Maybe they'd left early because of the rain? It made sense, but they should have left someone behind to receive the shipment. I reached for my cell phone out of habit, then remembered there was no service. The radio in Eleanor might reach someone, but who? The nearest town was at least 30 miles back. I took a deep breath and made a decision. I would unload the supplies myself, document the delivery, and get back on the road. With any luck, I could make it back to the main highway before full darkness set in. As I reached for the door handle, a flash of movement caught my eye. Something at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the reach of my headlights. I squinted, trying to make it out. A deer, maybe? Or a worker returning from somewhere. Whatever it was gone now. I told myself it was nothing, just the wind moving the branches or my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But as I stepped out of the cab into the cold, damp air, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The construction site awaited, silent and still under the darkening sky. I grabbed my flashlight and clipboard and stepped into the mud, my boots sinking slightly with each step. The delivery had to be made. It was my job. Just another routine drop-off. At least that's what I kept telling myself. The air was cold, biting even through my jacket as I approached the half-built structure. Rain dripped from the exposed beams, creating a steady rhythm like a metronome counting down to something I couldn't name. My flashlight beam bounced off wet surfaces, creating distorted reflections that seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. I didn't see any workers or security. The place was dead quiet except for the patter of rain and the occasional distant rumble of thunder. A normal construction site has a feeling of activity, even when empty tools left mid-task, half-empty coffee cups, cigarette butts. This place felt like it had never been touched by human hands, despite being partially built. The foundation was poured concrete, already showing signs of weathering that seemed too advanced for new construction. The framework rising from it was standard lumber, but something about the arrangement felt wrong. Doorways too narrow, ceilings unnecessarily high, windows positioned where no one would logically want them. I've delivered to hundreds of construction sites over the years, and this one didn't follow any blueprint I'd ever seen. I circled the structure, my boots squelching in the mud, looking for signs of recent activity. The rain had washed away any footprints, but surely there would be tire tracks, equipment, something. Nothing. Just pristine mud surrounding this bizarre skeleton of a house. Back at Eleanor, I checked my paperwork again. The delivery order was unusual. Most construction deliveries have specific contact information, site manager names, receiving instructions. This one just had coordinates and a vague description of the location. The company name listed was Northern Development LLC, generic enough to be meaningless. I climbed back into the cab, checked my watch, and decided to unload the supplies myself. It wasn't my job, but I figured I could save some time and hit the road early in the morning. The sooner I got away from this place, the better. The rain had stopped completely now, but the clouds hung low, trapping whatever daylight remained in a gray haze above the treetops. I fired up Eleanor's engine and backed her closer to what appeared to be the front of the house. The headlights illuminated the skeletal structure, creating long shadows that stretched into the surrounding forest like grasping fingers. I popped open the trailer and started dragging out the first pallet. The manifest listed standard construction materials: lumber, drywall, insulation, roofing supplies. Nothing unusual except for one item listed simply as special order components with no further details. I made a mental note to check for that after unloading the standard supplies. That's when I heard it. A low thud, like something heavy hitting the ground. I paused, listening, but the sound didn't come again. Probably just the wind knocking something over, I told myself. I was about to resume when I heard it again, closer this time, followed by a faint rustling in the underbrush. "Hello?" I called out, more out of habit than expecting a reply. Nothing. The only answer was the wind through the trees. I grabbed a crowbar from the tool chest in the truck, just in case. The job site was remote enough that it wouldn't be unusual for some drifter or animal to come sniffing around. But something felt off. My gut told me to leave, but I pushed the thought aside. I didn't want to spook myself over nothing. As I dragged the first pallet toward the house, I felt the weight of the darkness pressing in around me. The trees surrounding the clearing seemed to have moved closer, encroaching on the open space like spectators gathering around a fight. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Trees don't move. It was just my imagination working overtime. I forced myself to focus on the task at hand. The quicker I unloaded, the quicker I could leave. I set up a portable lamp from Eleanor's storage compartment, positioning it to illuminate the area where I was working. The harsh white light created more shadows than it dispelled, but it was better than nothing. As I was unloading the second pallet, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Something, or someone, was moving between the trees at the edge of the clearing. I squinted, trying to make out what it was, but the darkness swallowed the details. It was big, though, bigger than any animal I'd expect to see out here. "Hey!" I shouted, more forcefully this time. "Who's there?" Again, nothing. The shape disappeared into the woods, and I was left staring at the spot where it had been, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light. I went back to work, but now my hands were trembling. I told myself it was the cold, but I knew better. My instincts were screaming at me to get out of there, but stubbornness kept me going. I wasn't about to let some animal, or worse, my own mind, scare me off a job. The materials were heavier than usual, or maybe it was just fatigue making them seem that way. Each trip from the trailer to the house felt longer than the last. The darkness deepened, and now only my portable lamp and Eleanor's headlights provided any illumination. The forest beyond had become an impenetrable wall of black. I found myself working faster, rushing to finish before what? I couldn't answer that, but dread had settled in my stomach like a cold stone. The sooner I could get back on the road, the better. As I was carrying a bundle of lumber toward the house, I noticed something odd about the structure itself. From this angle, with the shadows playing across it, the frame seemed to shift and change. What had looked like a standard residential structure now appeared almost like a cage or a trap. The supports angled inward like teeth, and the doorways resembled nothing so much as gaping maws. I blinked, and it was just a house frame again. My imagination was getting the better of me. I needed to finish this job and get some rest. The manifest indicated there should be a large crate labeled Special Order Components somewhere in the trailer. I searched but couldn't find it. Odd, I double-checked the paperwork. It was definitely on the list, but not in the shipment. Either someone had made a mistake at the loading dock, or... A shiver ran down my spine as another possibility occurred to me. What if someone had already been here? What if they had taken only that crate and left the rest? I was pondering this when I heard it again, that same thud. Only this time it was directly behind me. I spun around, the crowbar raised, ready to defend myself. And there he was, standing not 20 feet away, a man, if you could call him that. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a thick, muscular build. His clothes were dirty and torn, hanging off him like rags. His skin was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light of the headlights. But what struck me most was his face. It was twisted, deformed, as if it had been melted and then left to harden in the wrong shape. Scars crisscrossed his skin, some old and faded, others fresh and angry. His mouth was pulled into a grotesque grin, revealing teeth that were jagged and yellow. He didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with that twisted grin. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I'd heard stories about squatters or homeless people hiding out in abandoned sites, but this was something else. "Get the hell out of here," I barked, trying to sound braver than I felt. I brandished the crowbar, hoping he'd take the hint, but he didn't move. He just kept grinning, his eyes fixed on me. Then, without warning, he took a step forward. I took a step back. He tilted his head like a curious dog and took another step. I matched it, maintaining the distance between us. This strange dance continued until my back pressed against the trailer. I was trapped. He stopped advancing, still keeping that same distance. Up close, I could see more details that my mind struggled to process. His eyes weren't just dark. They were like holes in his face, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. His skin had an unnatural texture, like leather that had been repeatedly soaked and dried. "What do you want?" My voice came out steadier than I expected. He didn't respond. Just that same head tilt, that same grotesque grin. Then slowly he raised one hand and pointed at the trailer behind me. "The delivery?" I asked, not expecting an answer. "It's all yours, buddy. Just let me get back in my truck and I'll be on my way." I started to edge sideways toward the cab of Eleanor, but he moved with me, blocking my path. I gripped the crowbar tighter, knowing I might have to use it. The thought of making contact with him, even with a weapon, made my stomach turn. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I don't want any trouble. I'm just doing my job." For the first time, his expression changed. The grin faltered, replaced by something that might have been confusion. He lowered his hand and took a step back. For a moment, I thought he might let me go. Then he spoke, and everything got worse. "Not your job." His voice was like gravel being crushed, barely recognizable as human speech. "Wrong place." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because of what he said, but because he shouldn't have been able to speak at all. His mouth didn't move in time with the words. It was as if the sound was coming from somewhere else, using him as a conduit. "What do you mean, wrong place?" I asked, immediately regretting engaging with him. He pointed again, not at the trailer this time, but at the house frame. "Not house," he ground out, "not for living." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran through me. The wrongness of the structure's design flashed through my mind again, the awkward angles, the strange proportions, not designed for human habitation. "Then what is it?" The question escaped before I could stop it. His grin returned, wider than before, stretching his face in ways that skin shouldn't stretch. "Waiting." That's when I knew I had to get out of there immediately. Whatever was happening here, whatever this man was, I wanted no part of it. I feinted left, then darted right, making a break for Eleanor's cab. He was faster than he looked, much faster. He lunged forward with impossible speed, crossing the space between us in a blink. I swung the crowbar wildly, but he was faster than he looked. He dodged to the side, grabbing my arm with a grip like a vice. His strength was unbelievable. His fingers dug into my flesh with such force that I felt the bruises forming instantly. He twisted my arm behind my back, forcing me to drop the crowbar. I tried to fight back, but it was like hitting a wall. He slammed me against the side of the truck, knocking the wind out of me. My cheek pressed against the cold metal of Eleanor's trailer, and for a brief, absurd moment, I felt like apologizing to her for what was happening. As I struggled to breathe, he leaned in close, that grin never leaving his face. I could feel his hot, rancid breath on my neck, and my mind went blank with terror. It smelled like meat left too long in the sun, like something dying from the inside out. I gagged, my eyes watering. "Wrong delivery." He rasped in that impossible voice. "Wrong builder." I didn't understand what he meant, and at that moment I didn't care. All I wanted was to get away from him, away from this place, back to the world that made sense. I summoned what strength I had left and tried to twist free, but his grip only tightened. "Please," I gasped, hating the fear in my voice but unable to control it. "I don't know what you're talking about, just let me go." He pulled me back from the trailer, then spun me around to face him. This close, the details of his deformity were nightmarishly clear. What I had taken for scars were more like seams, as if pieces of different faces had been stitched together. His eyes, those black pits, seemed to study me with an intelligence that contradicted his monstrous appearance. "Not your fault," he said, each word seeming to cause him pain. "But can't leave." My heart sank. So this was it. This remote clearing would be where Leonard Mercer's story ended. I thought of Marianne, wondered if I'd see her soon. The thought brought an unexpected calm. If this was the end, at least the loneliness would finally stop. But then, just as suddenly as it started, he released me. I stumbled back, gasping for air, trying to process what had just happened. He stood there watching me, his head cocked to one side as if he was studying me. I reached down slowly and picked up the crowbar, though I knew it would be useless against him if he decided to attack again. "Go," he said, the words surprisingly clear. I didn't need to be told twice. I started backing toward Eleanor's cab, keeping the crowbar raised, keeping my eyes on him. He made no move to follow, just stood there watching me with those black hole eyes. When my back hit the door of the cab, I fumbled for the handle, never taking my eyes off him. I expected him to lunge at any moment to snatch this hope of escape away, but he remained motionless, only his eyes tracking my movements. I yanked the door open and scrambled inside, slamming it shut and locking it immediately. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. I kept expecting to see his twisted face appear at the window, those stitched-together features pressed against the glass. Eleanor's engine roared to life, the familiar sound bringing a rush of relief so intense I nearly wept. I threw her into gear and hit the gas, not caring about the supplies still in the trailer, not caring about the job or the paperwork or anything except getting away from there. The tires spun in the mud before finding traction. I reversed in a wide arc, the headlights sweeping across the clearing. He was still there, standing exactly where I'd left him. But something had changed. His posture was different, slumped, almost defeated. As the headlights illuminated him, I caught a glimpse of his expression. The grin was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like sorrow. Then I was facing the road, and I floored it. Eleanor surged forward, her engine straining as we bounced over the rough terrain. I didn't slow down until we reached the main dirt road, and even then, I kept the speedometer higher than was safe for these conditions. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The image of his face was burned into my mind, those seams, those empty eyes, that unnatural grin. But it was his voice that haunted me most, those disjointed words that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Wrong place, wrong builder, not for living, waiting. What did it all mean? What was being built out there in the middle of nowhere? And who or what was he? I checked the rearview mirror constantly, half expecting to see him somehow keeping pace with the truck, but the road behind me remained empty, just darkness and the fading outlines of trees. After about 20 minutes of driving like a man possessed, the adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion and a throbbing pain where he had gripped my arm. I pulled over to the side of the road and killed the engine. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own ragged breathing. I switched on the cab light and examined my arm. 5 distinct bruises were forming where his fingers had dug in, already turning a deep purple. I flexed my hand, wincing at the pain that shot up to my shoulder. Nothing seemed broken, at least. I sat there for a long time, trying to make sense of what had happened. The rational part of my mind searched for explanations. He was just a man, a deformed, possibly mentally ill man, who had made that remote construction site his home. The strange house design was just shoddy workmanship. His warnings were the ramblings of a disturbed mind, but I couldn't make myself believe it. Something about him had been fundamentally wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. The way he moved, the way he spoke, the way his face seemed assembled rather than grown, all of it defied rational explanation, and those words kept repeating in my mind. Wrong place, wrong builder, not for living, waiting. I shuddered and started Eleanor's engine again. I couldn't stay here, alone in the dark with those thoughts circling like vultures. I needed to get back to civilization, to lights and people and normality. I needed to report what had happened, though I had no idea who would believe me. I didn't stop again until I reached the nearest town, a small place called Mill Creek that consisted of little more than a gas station, a diner, and a handful of houses clustered around a single intersection. I pulled into the gas station and sat there, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. The fluorescent lights of the convenience store were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Normal, ordinary, safe. I watched as a teenager mopped the floor inside, completely unaware of my presence or the horrors I'd just escaped. The mundanity of it brought me back to myself somewhat. I needed to call someone, report what had happened. But who? The police seemed the obvious choice, but what would I tell them? That I'd been attacked by a deformed man at a construction site? That there was something wrong with the building itself? That I'd abandoned a delivery worth thousands of dollars because I got spooked? No matter how I framed it, I would sound crazy. And yet, I couldn't just do nothing. What if someone else got sent out there? What if another driver found themselves face to face with him? I decided to start with Interstate Hauling, my employer. At the very least, I needed to explain why I'd abandoned the load. I used the payphone outside the gas station, feeding it quarters with trembling fingers. The dispatcher who answered was Jerry, a no-nonsense veteran who'd been with the company longer than I had. Interstate Hauling, Jerry speaking. Jerry, it's Leo Mercer. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and shaky. Leo, what's going on? You should have delivered hours ago. I took a deep breath. There's been a problem with the delivery. I couldn't complete it. What kind of problem? Jerry's tone shifted from annoyed to concerned. I rarely failed to complete a job. The site was deserted, no one to receive the shipment, and there was... I trailed off, unsure how to continue. Was what, Leo? Talk to me. There was someone there, not a worker, some kind of squatter, I guess. He attacked me. Jesus, are you okay? Did you call the police? I'm fine, shaken up, but fine. I haven't called the police yet. I wanted to check with you first. Jerry was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, measured. This delivery, it was to Northern Development, right? Yeah, that's right. Another pause. You're not the first driver we've sent out there, Leo. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? We sent Pete Owens out there 3 months ago. Similar delivery. He came back. Different. Quit the next day. Haven't heard from him since. My mouth went dry. Different how? Wouldn't talk about what happened. Just said he was done with driving, done with Interstate. Last I heard, he moved away, somewhere up north. I leaned against the phone booth, suddenly exhausted. Jerry, there's something wrong with that place. The building they're putting up, it's all wrong. And that man, he wasn't right. Not right how? I couldn't find the words to describe what I'd seen. Just not right. Listen, I need to report this to someone. I'll call the client, let them know there was a problem with delivery. As for the police... He paused again. Look, Leo, you do what you need to do. But between you and me, I'd let this one go. Come back to the yard tomorrow, we'll sort out the paperwork. Chalk it up as a site access issue. His tone made it clear that he knew more than he was saying. Or maybe he'd heard things from Pete Owens that he didn't want to repeat over the phone. Either way, his warning was implicit. Don't dig deeper. But I couldn't just walk away, not without understanding what had happened. Not with those words still echoing in my mind. Wrong place, wrong builder, not for living, waiting. Thanks, Jerry. I'll see you tomorrow. I hung up and stood there for a moment, considering my options. Then I walked into the gas station and asked the bored teenager behind the counter where I could find the local police station. The Mill Creek Police Department was housed in a small brick building that had clearly seen better days. The paint was peeling, and one of the windows was patched with duct tape. A single patrol car sat in the parking lot, its white paint dulled by dust and age. Inside, a middle-aged woman sat behind a desk, filling out paperwork. She looked up as I entered, her expression shifting from boredom to mild interest. "Can I help you?" she asked, setting down her pen. "I need to report an incident," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The bruises on my arm were throbbing, a constant reminder that what had happened was real. "What kind of incident?" "An assault at a construction site about 30 miles north of here." She raised an eyebrow. "Construction site? You mean the Northern Development Project?" I nodded, surprised that she knew about it. "That's the one." She studied me for a moment, then sighed and reached for a form. "Have a seat. I'll get Officer Wilson." I sat in one of the plastic chairs along the wall, suddenly aware of how I must look, disheveled, muddy, with wild eyes and visible bruises forming on my arm. No wonder she seemed wary. A few minutes later, a tall man in a police uniform emerged from a back room. Officer Wilson was younger than I expected for what seemed like a one-cop town, maybe in his early 30s. He had the build of a former athlete who was just starting to lose the battle with middle age. "Sir, I understand you want to report an assault?" His voice was professional, but I could detect a note of skepticism already. "That's right." I stood up, wincing as the movement aggravated my injured arm. He gestured for me to follow him into a small office. "Let's talk in here." The office was cramped, dominated by a desk covered in papers and a computer that looked at least a decade old. Wilson sat behind the desk and motioned for me to take the chair opposite. "So you were at the Northern Development site?" he asked, pulling out a notepad. "Yes, I'm a truck driver for interstate hauling. I was delivering construction supplies." "And someone assaulted you there?" I nodded, then launched into my story. I told him about the deserted site, the strange design of the house, the sounds in the woods. When I got to the part about the deformed man, I could see his expression change, hardening into disbelief. "Let me get this straight," he interrupted. "You're saying a deformed man with, what did you call it? A stitched-together face attacked you, then let you go after saying cryptic things about the building. Put that way, it sounded absurd even to me." "I know how it sounds, but yes, that's what happened. Look at my arm." I pulled up my sleeve to show the bruises. Wilson looked at the marks, his expression softening slightly. "I believe you were assaulted, Mr. Mercer. Those bruises are real enough. But this story about a deformed man, you have to understand how it sounds." "I know exactly how it sounds," I said, frustration seeping into my voice. "But it's what happened, and I'm not the first driver to have problems at that site." That caught his attention. "What do you mean?" "My dispatcher told me another driver was sent there a few months ago, came back different, quit his job and moved away." Wilson leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen against the notepad. "The site has had its share of incidents, mostly trespassing, some vandalism, but nothing like what you're describing." "So you know about the place?" He nodded slowly. "It's in our jurisdiction, technically. Though it's so remote, we rarely have reason to go out there. Northern Development got all the proper permits a year ago. They've been building slowly, seasonal work, they said." "There's something wrong with that place," I insisted. "The design of the building doesn't make sense. It's not a normal house." "I'm not a construction expert, Mr. Mercer. Neither are you, I'm guessing." I couldn't argue with that. "Will you at least check it out? Make sure there isn't some lunatic living out there?" Wilson sighed, closing his notepad. "I'll send a patrol car out there tomorrow morning, first light." "Tomorrow? Why not now?" "Because it's nearly midnight, the site is remote, and if there is someone dangerous out there, I'm not sending one of my officers alone in the dark." Wilson's tone made it clear the discussion was over. "We'll investigate first thing in the morning and call you with what we find." I wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with me. The adrenaline that had kept me going was fading, leaving me drained. "Fine, tomorrow morning." I gave him my cell number, though I mentioned the spotty service in the area. He assured me they'd reach me one way or another. As I stood to leave, Wilson's expression softened slightly. "Look, Mr. Mercer, I understand you've had a traumatic experience. There's a motel just down the street, Pinewood Inn. Get some rest. Things will look clearer in the morning." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without letting my frustration show. As I reached the door, he called after me. "Mr. Mercer, one more thing." I turned back. "The Northern Development site. There have been stories about it, local legends, nothing substantial, just typical small-town talk." He hesitated. "But if even half of what you're saying is true, maybe there's something to them." "What kind of stories?" I asked, suddenly alert despite my fatigue. He shook his head. "Just rumors. The land was cheap for a reason. The previous owner disappeared about 5 years ago. Left everything behind, clothes, car, personal effects. Never found a body." A chill ran through me. "And nobody investigated?" "Of course we investigated, found nothing. The official conclusion was that he walked off into the woods and got lost. It happens up here more often than you'd think." Wilson didn't sound entirely convinced by the official story. "Anyway, get some rest. We'll sort this out tomorrow." I left the police station with more questions than answers. The Pinewood Inn was exactly where Wilson had said, a single-story motel with peeling paint and a flickering vacancy sign. The night clerk barely looked up from his magazine as I paid for a room. The room was basic but clean. A double bed, a small bathroom, a TV that probably got 3 channels on a good day. I locked the door, then dragged a chair over and wedged it under the handle for good measure. Paranoid, maybe, but after what I'd experienced, I wasn't taking chances. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing despite my exhaustion. The encounter with the deformed man played on repeat in my thoughts. His words, his impossible movement, his strength, none of it made sense. And now learning about the previous owner's disappearance, the incidents at the site, something was very wrong. I remembered the paperwork for the delivery and pulled it from my jacket pocket. The manifest listed standard construction supplies, plus that mysterious special order components item that had been missing from the shipment. The client was Northern Development LLC, with an address in Albuquerque that I recognized as an office park filled with shell companies and virtual offices. On a hunch, I picked up the room phone and dialed information. When the operator answered, I asked for any listings for Northern Development LLC in New Mexico. After a moment, she confirmed what I suspected. No such listing existed. I hung up and stared at the manifest again. My entire adult life had been spent in logistics, picking up packages from one place, delivering them to another. Simple. Straightforward. Never questioning what was in the boxes or who was receiving them. But now I couldn't help but wonder what I had been unwittingly involved in. The missing crate of special order components bothered me. Had someone removed it before I arrived? Or had it never been loaded in the first place? And what was it supposed to contain? My eyelids grew heavy as fatigue finally overtook curiosity and fear. I didn't bother undressing, just kicked off my boots and lay back on the bed. Despite my racing thoughts, sleep claimed me almost immediately. I dreamed of the half-built house. Except in the dream, it was complete. From the outside, it looked normal. A large cabin-style home with a wraparound porch. But when I entered, the interior was an impossible maze of corridors that twisted back on themselves, staircases that led nowhere, and doors that opened onto solid walls. I wandered through this labyrinth, hearing something moving just around each corner, always out of sight. Then I turned a corner, and there he was, the deformed man, standing at the end of a long hallway. But in the dream he wasn't threatening. He looked sad, almost pleading. He held out his hand, revealing a small object in his palm. I couldn't make out what it was, but I knew it was important. I started walking toward him, but the hallway kept stretching, getting longer with each step I took. He was saying something, but I couldn't hear the words. I jerked awake to the sound of knocking at my door. Sunlight streamed through the gap in the curtains. I sat up, disoriented, my back aching from sleeping in my clothes. The knocking came again, more insistent this time. "Mr. Mercer, it's Officer Wilson." I stumbled to the door, removing the chair and unlocking it. Wilson stood there in uniform, his expression grim. "We need to talk," he said, stepping into the room without waiting for an invitation. "We sent a patrol car out to the site this morning." I was instantly alert. "And did you find him?" Wilson shook his head. We found no one, no signs of anyone living there or squatting. The site was exactly as it should be, partially constructed, materials stacked neatly, everything in order. I stared at him in disbelief. That's not possible. The frame was all wrong, the angles, the proportions, and there was no order to it. It looked wrong. The officer who went out there is a former contractor. He said everything looked standard to him, foundation, framing, all by the book. Wilson pulled out his notepad. But we did find something interesting. Your truck's trailer was still there, half unloaded, and there was evidence of a struggle. Mud disturbed near the truck, a crowbar on the ground. See, I told you what happened was real. I believe something happened out there, Mr. Mercer, but here's where it gets strange. He flipped a page in his notepad. We ran a check on Northern Development LLC. The company doesn't exist, at least not legally. The permits were issued to a shell company that leads nowhere. The land is registered to a holding company based in the Cayman Islands. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. So who's building out there, and what are they building? Wilson closed his notepad. That's what I'd like to know. But here's the kicker. When my officer called it in, he was told to leave it alone. Orders from above. Above? You mean like the state police? Higher than that? Wilson's expression was hard to read. Someone doesn't want us looking too closely at that site, which makes me very interested in what you saw out there. I sat back down on the bed, trying to process this information. Are you saying you believe me now? I'm saying there's more going on than meets the eye. Your story is still difficult to accept, but something's not right about that place. He hesitated. There's something else. We checked with Interstate Hauling. They have no record of a delivery scheduled to that site yesterday. What? That's impossible. I have the paperwork right here. I reached for my jacket, pulling out the manifest. Wilson took it, examining it carefully. This looks legitimate, but according to your dispatcher, your scheduled route yesterday was a delivery to Santa Fe, not Northern Mill Creek. When you didn't check in, they assumed you'd had mechanical trouble and would call it in eventually. I shook my head, trying to make sense of this. That's not right. Jerry knew about the delivery. He even mentioned another driver who'd been sent there before. We spoke with Jerry Hoffman directly. He says he hasn't talked to you since Monday. Wilson handed the manifest back to me. Either he's lying, or I'm crazy. I finished for him. I know what happened. I have the bruises to prove it. Wilson nodded toward my arm. Those could have come from anywhere, a fight, an accident. They don't prove your story about a deformed man at a non-existent construction site. I stood up, anger cutting through my confusion. So that's it? You're going to drop it because someone told you to? Because it's easier to think I'm making it all up? I didn't say that. Wilson's voice was calm. I'm off duty in an hour. If you're interested in finding out what's really going on, meet me at Rosie's Diner at the edge of town. 2 p.m. He moved toward the door. Officially, this case is closed. Unofficially, I don't like being told to look the other way. After he left, I sat on the bed for a long time, staring at the manifest in my hands. The paper felt real. The assignment had felt real. The deformed man had definitely been real. But if Interstate had no record of the delivery, where had the paperwork come from? And why would someone go to such lengths to get me to that remote site? I thought about just leaving town, getting as far away from Mill Creek and that construction site as possible. It would be the sensible thing to do, but I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I understood what had happened. The questions would haunt me. At 1:55 p.m. I walked into Rosie's Diner, ready to hear what Wilson had to say. Rosie's Diner looked like it had been transplanted directly from the 1950s. Chrome fixtures, red vinyl booths, and a jukebox in the corner playing Buddy Holly. It was nearly empty in the mid-afternoon lull, with just a couple of locals nursing coffee at the counter. Wilson was already there, sitting in a booth at the back, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt. He nodded as I approached, but didn't speak until I slid into the seat across from him. "Glad you came," he said, his voice low. "I wasn't sure you would." "I need answers," I replied simply. A waitress appeared and we both ordered coffee. When she left, Wilson leaned forward, his forearms on the table. "What I'm about to tell you stays between us," he began. "My career would be over if anyone found out I was discussing this." I nodded, a knot forming in my stomach. "The Northern Development site has been on our radar for about a year, not officially. There's no investigation, no case file. But strange things happen around that property." He paused as the waitress returned with our coffees. When she was out of earshot, he continued. "It started with the disappearance of the previous owner, Victor Harding. Local guy, kept to himself. One day his neighbors reported they hadn't seen him in weeks. We found his cabin intact, food in the fridge, TV still on, like he just walked out the door and vanished." "You mentioned that yesterday," I said. Wilson nodded. "What I didn't mention was what we found in his basement, a room completely sealed with concrete except for a small opening at the top. Inside, the walls were covered with writings, equations, diagrams, what looked like architectural plans. Most of it didn't make sense to us, but one phrase was repeated throughout. 'The gateway is opening.'" I felt a chill despite the warmth of the diner. Gateway to what? That's the million-dollar question. Wilson took a sip of his coffee. "After Harding disappeared, the property sat vacant for a few years. Then Northern Development bought it. Cash deal, completed in days. They filed permits for a private residence and started construction last spring." "But you said the company doesn't exist." "On paper, it exists. It's registered, pays taxes, files paperwork. But when you start digging into who owns it, who runs it, you hit dead ends. Shell companies within shell companies." He lowered his voice further. "What bothers me most is the reaction when we try to investigate. Every time we get close, someone makes a call and we're told to back off. Who's making those calls?" Wilson shook his head. "I don't know. Too high up for me to see. But whoever it is has enough pull to make the state police, the county sheriff, and the FBI all suddenly develop amnesia about the site." I thought about the deformed man, his warnings about wrong place and wrong builder. "There's more," Wilson continued. 3 hikers went missing in those woods last summer. Search and rescue combed the area for weeks. Nothing. Then 2 months ago, one of them walked into a ranger station 60 miles away. Dehydrated, malnourished, clothes in tatters. "What did he say happened?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "That's just it. He couldn't say. Complete amnesia about the entire period. Doctors said his condition was consistent with someone who had suffered extreme psychological trauma." Wilson's eyes met mine. "But here's the thing. They found strange marks on his body. 5 distinct bruises on his arm, exactly like the ones you showed me yesterday." I instinctively touched my arm where the bruises had darkened overnight. "So you do believe me?" "I believe something is happening at that site that defies conventional explanation. I believe you encountered something out there." He sighed. "But I also believe we're way out of our depth." "So what do we do?" Wilson pulled out a small notebook and slid it across the table. "This was in Harding's cabin. I borrowed it from evidence before it disappeared like everything else connected to this case." I opened the notebook. It was filled with cramped handwriting, diagrams, and sketches. Many pages contained what looked like complex mathematical equations, far beyond my understanding. But what caught my eye were the drawings, architectural plans for a structure that looked eerily familiar. "It's the house," I said, my mouth dry. "The one being built at the site." Wilson nodded. "Keep looking." I flipped through more pages until I came to a detailed sketch of a man or something man-like. The proportions were wrong, the limbs too long, the face distorted in a way that sent a jolt of recognition through me. "That's him," I whispered. "The man I saw. But how? Harding drew this years ago. According to his notes, he didn't create it. He saw it." Wilson tapped the page. Harding was a physicist, specializing in theoretical dimensions. Most of his colleagues thought he was brilliant but unstable. He became obsessed with the idea that our reality overlaps with others, and that certain locations serve as nexus points between dimensions. And he thought his property was one of these nexus points. He was convinced of it. According to his notes, he began experiencing strange phenomena, time distortions, visual anomalies, vivid dreams of other worlds. Then he started seeing the figure. Wilson pointed to the sketch. He called it the custodian. The name sent a chill through me. Custodian of what? The gateway. Harding believed that certain structures, built with specific dimensions and alignments, could stabilize these nexus points, allowing for controlled passage between worlds. Wilson's voice remained steady, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Doubt about whether he should be telling me this, doubt about whether any of it could be true. So this northern development, they're building Harding's gateway? The idea seemed absurd, yet I couldn't dismiss it after what I'd experienced. Someone found his research and decided it was worth pursuing. The question is, who and why? Wilson closed the notebook. There's one more thing you should know. The delivery you made yesterday? It wasn't the first. According to Harding's notes, the gateway requires specific materials at specific stages of construction. The timing has to be precise. I thought about the missing crate, the special order components that hadn't been in the trailer. They're using drivers like me to deliver these materials, aren't they? People who won't ask questions, who'll just drop off a package and leave. Wilson nodded. Except you didn't leave. You saw something you weren't supposed to see. But why let me go, if they're trying to keep this secret? I don't know. Wilson looked troubled. Nothing about this makes sense through any conventional lens. But if even half of Harding's theories are correct, we're dealing with something far beyond our understanding. We sat in silence for a moment, the implications settling over us like a heavy blanket. Part of me wanted to walk away, to convince myself that Harding had been delusional, that the deformed man had been just a squatter with birth defects, that the coincidences were just that, coincidences. But I knew better. I had seen him, felt his impossible strength, heard his warnings. So what now? I finally asked. Wilson drained the last of his coffee. Now you get in your truck and drive away from Mill Creek. Go back to your life. Forget this ever happened. That's my official advice. And unofficially, a grim smile touched his lips. Unofficially, I think there are forces at work here that we can't begin to comprehend, forces that won't appreciate our curiosity. You're scared, I realized. Damn right I am, and you should be too. He stood up, dropping a few bills on the table for the coffee. Whatever's happening at that site, it's bigger than both of us. Sometimes the smartest thing to do is walk away. But as he turned to leave, I caught his arm. What if we can't walk away? What if this gateway, or whatever it is, affects us all? Wilson looked down at my hand, then back at my face. Then God help us, Mr. Mercer, because I don't think anyone else can. After Wilson left, I sat in the booth for a long time, turning over everything he had told me. The story was fantastical, the stuff of science fiction, not something a middle-aged truck driver should be involved with. Yet the bruises on my arm were real. The encounter had been real. I thought about the deformed man, the custodian, as Harding had called him. He had let me go when he could have killed me. He had warned me. Wrong place, wrong builder, not for living, waiting. A thought occurred to me, chilling in its implications. What if he wasn't guarding the gateway to keep people out? What if he was trying to prevent something from coming through? I paid for my coffee and walked out to Eleanor, still parked in the motel lot. She was the one constant in all this madness, reliable and unchanged. I ran my hand along her hood, drawing comfort from the familiar feel of her. My cell phone rang, the dispatcher from Interstate, wondering where I was and why I hadn't checked in. I gave them a vague story about truck trouble and promised to be back the next day. It was surprisingly easy to lie now after everything that had happened. As the sun began to set, I made my decision. I couldn't walk away, not without knowing. I had to go back to the site one last time. Not to confront the custodian or to unravel the mystery completely. I wasn't that brave or that foolish, but I needed to see it again in the light of day with the context Wilson had provided. Maybe then I could make sense of what had happened, find some peace. I would go at dawn, I decided, quick in and out just to look. Then I would drive away and never return to Mill Creek again. The night passed fitfully, my sleep interrupted by dreams of twisted corridors and a deformed face watching me with sad, ancient eyes. I woke before my alarm, the first gray light of dawn seeping through the curtains. I dressed quickly, checked out of the motel, and climbed into Eleanor's cab. The drive back to the site seemed shorter in daylight. The forest was less menacing, the road less treacherous, but with each mile a sense of dread built within me. By the time I reached the turnoff to the dirt road, my knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I parked Eleanor a quarter-mile from the site, hidden among the trees. I didn't want to announce my presence in case there were workers present or something worse. The morning air was crisp and cool as I began walking, alert for any sound or movement. The site appeared empty as I approached, just as it had been before. The half-built structure stood in the clearing, bathed in early morning light. My trailer was gone, presumably retrieved by Interstate or whoever had arranged the delivery. I stayed at the edge of the clearing, observing from a distance. In daylight, the wrongness of the building was even more apparent. The angles were subtly off, creating an optical illusion where the structure seemed to shift when viewed from different positions. It wasn't a house, not really. It was something wearing the disguise of a house, like the deformed man wore the disguise of humanity. As I watched, I noticed something I'd missed before. At the center of the foundation was a perfect circle of concrete, darker than the surrounding material. It resembled a well or a shaft, except there was no opening, just the distinct circular pattern, the gateway. I was so focused on the structure that I almost missed the sound. A car engine approaching along the dirt road. I ducked behind a tree, peering out cautiously. A black SUV with tinted windows came into view, followed by another. They parked near where my truck had been the night before, and several men in dark suits emerged. They moved with the coordinated precision of professionals, spreading out to survey the site. One of them, clearly in charge, spoke into a radio. I couldn't hear what he was saying, but his gestures toward the structure indicated concern or displeasure. I should have left then, should have crept back to Eleanor and driven away while I had the chance. But curiosity kept me rooted to the spot, watching as more vehicles arrived, unmarked vans, a truck carrying what looked like scientific equipment. Within an hour, the site had transformed into a hive of activity. Men in hazmat suits unloaded equipment. Others set up a perimeter of what appeared to be sensors or monitoring devices around the structure. Whatever was happening, it was organized, funded, and serious. I was about to retreat when a familiar face caught my eye. Wilson. He emerged from one of the SUVs, not in uniform but wearing the same kind of dark suit as the others. He spoke briefly with the man in charge, then moved toward the structure, examining it with practiced eyes. Betrayal shot through me like a bullet. Wilson hadn't been investigating against orders. He'd been part of whatever this was all along. His story about Harding, the warnings to stay away, all of it designed to gauge how much I knew, what I'd seen. I began backing away slowly, keeping trees between myself and the site. I needed to get to Eleanor, to get as far away from Mill Creek as possible. Whatever was happening here, I wanted no part of it. I'd gone perhaps 50 yards when a twig snapped beneath my foot. The sound was small, but in the quiet forest it might as well have been a gunshot. I froze, holding my breath. A voice called out from the direction of the site. Sector 3, movement in the trees. I ran. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, all attempts at stealth abandoned. Behind me I could hear shouts, the crackle of radios, the pounding of feet in pursuit. Eleanor was just ahead, hidden among the trees. If I could reach her, I might have a chance. 20 yards, 10. I fumbled for the keys in my pocket. Something hard struck me from behind, sending me sprawling. I hit the ground hard, the air knocked from my lungs. Before I could recover, rough hands seized my arms, pulling them behind my back. The cold bite of handcuffs encircled my wrists. I was hauled to my feet, coming face to face with Wilson. His expression was unreadable as he studied me. "I told you to leave, Mercer," he said, his voice devoid of the warmth it had held in the diner. "You lied to me," I spat back. "All that talk about investigating against orders, you're part of this." He sighed, glancing at the men holding me. "Take him to base camp, full protocol." They dragged me back toward the site, past the half-built structure to where a large tent had been erected behind it. Inside, the tent was filled with computer equipment, monitors displaying readings I didn't understand, and maps of the area covered in notations. They secured me to a chair in the corner, a guard posted nearby. From this position, I could see through the tent opening to where teams of workers swarmed around the structure. They were adding to it, but not in any conventional construction sense. They were attaching devices to key points, running cables, taking measurements. Hours passed. No one spoke to me or acknowledged my presence. I watched as the sun climbed higher, then began its descent. The activity outside never ceased, taking on a greater urgency as the day progressed. Finally, as twilight approached, Wilson entered the tent. He dismissed the guard with a nod and pulled up a chair across from me. "You should have listened," he said simply. "To your lies?" My voice was rough from thirst and fear. "Not everything I told you was a lie." He leaned forward. "Harding was real. His research was real. The gateway is real. What I didn't tell you is that we've been monitoring it for years." "We?" "A division within the government that doesn't officially exist. After Harding disappeared, we found his research. At first we thought he was just another crackpot physicist who'd gone off the deep end. Then we started experiencing the same phenomena he'd documented. I thought of the deformed man, the custodian. So you're trying to open this gateway? Why? Not open it." Wilson's expression darkened. "Seal it, permanently." He stood and moved to one of the monitors, gesturing for me to look. On the screen was a thermal image of the structure, but with an anomaly. At its center, where I'd noticed the circular pattern in the foundation, was a pulsing point of cold, so intense it appeared as a black void in the otherwise colorful display. "The gateway has been there for centuries, maybe millennia. Most of the time it's dormant, but every few decades it activates, expanding, becoming more permeable. Harding was the first to document it scientifically, to understand that the right structure built around it could either stabilize it or close it for good." "The deformed man, the custodian," Wilson nodded. "He's been seen throughout history. Native American legends refer to a twisted guardian who protects the doorway to other worlds. Early settlers reported encounters with a misshapen man who appeared and disappeared in the forests, always near this location, always with the same warnings." "He tried to stop me from making the delivery," I said, understanding dawning. "He said it was the wrong place, the wrong builder." "Because we're not building what Harding designed." Wilson's voice lowered. "Harding wanted to open the gateway fully, to establish permanent contact with whatever lies on the other side. We're doing the opposite, using his research to close it forever." "But why?" I asked. "What's on the other side that's so dangerous?" Wilson was silent for a long moment. "We don't know exactly. But the effects of the gateway, even in its dormant state, are concerning enough. Time distortions, reality fluctuations, psychological impacts on people who spend too long near it. If it were to open fully." He shook his head. "Let's just say we're not taking that chance." Outside, an alarm began to sound. Wilson's head snapped up, his expression tightening. He moved quickly to the tent entrance, speaking urgently with someone outside. When he turned back to me, his face was grim. "We're out of time. The gateway is expanding faster than we anticipated. The sealing process needs to begin now." As if to emphasize his words, a low rumble shook the ground beneath us. Equipment rattled, and one of the monitors crashed to the floor. It wasn't like an earthquake, it was more focused, centered on the structure. Wilson came back to me, producing a key and unlocking my handcuffs. "You need to get out of here. Take your truck and drive as far and as fast as you can. Don't stop until you're at least 100 miles away." "Why are you letting me go?" "Because in about 20 minutes this entire area is going to be subjected to energies that the human body isn't designed to withstand, and because, despite what you think, I'm not the bad guy here." He pulled me to my feet. "Go, now." Another tremor, stronger this time. Outside I could hear shouting, the sound of equipment being hastily moved. Wilson pushed me toward the back of the tent. "There's a path through the trees there. It'll take you back to your truck. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything." I hesitated, still not sure if I could trust him. "What about the custodian? Will he try to stop me?" "He's gone." Wilson's expression was unreadable. "We haven't detected his presence since yesterday. Either he's retreated deeper into the gateway, or—" He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. I understood. The custodian had failed in his mission to protect the gateway. Now he was gone, and whatever lay on the other side was pushing through. I moved toward the tent exit, then stopped, turning back. "Wilson, if you're really trying to seal this thing, good luck." He nodded once, then turned back to the chaos of the command center. I ran, through the trees, following the faint path, as behind me the sky above the construction site began to glow with an unnatural light. The ground continued to shake, the tremors growing stronger with each passing minute. By the time I reached Eleanor, hidden among the trees, the entire forest seemed to be vibrating. I climbed into the cab, my hands shaking as I inserted the key. The engine roared to life, a comforting sound amid the growing chaos. I backed onto the dirt road and floored it, not caring about the rough terrain. I had to get away. In the rearview mirror, I could see the glow intensifying, casting strange shadows through the trees. Whatever Wilson and his people were doing, it was reaching some kind of climax. I pressed harder on the accelerator, Eleanor's frame protesting as we bounced over the uneven road. I'd gone perhaps 2 miles when it happened. A flash of light so intense it turned night to day for an instant, followed by a shockwave that lifted the back of the truck and nearly sent me into the ditch. I fought for control, managing to keep Eleanor on the road as the wave passed. When I dared to look in the mirror again, a column of light was rising from where the sight had been, stretching up into the clouds. It pulsed once, twice, then collapsed in on itself with a finality I felt more than saw. Then silence. The tremor stopped, the light faded. The forest returned to darkness, broken only by my headlights cutting through the night. I kept driving, following Wilson's instructions to put as much distance as possible between myself and the sight. By dawn, I was 2 states away, Eleanor's gas tank nearly empty, my mind numb with exhaustion and the weight of what I'd witnessed. I've told no one else this story until now. Who would believe it? Sometimes I'm not sure I believe it myself. The bruises on my arm faded weeks ago, leaving no physical evidence of my encounter with the custodian. Interstate hauling has no record of the delivery, and when I tried to look up Officer Wilson or the Mill Creek Police Department, I found nothing, as if the town itself had been erased. But I know what I saw. I know what happened. And sometimes in my dreams, I see the custodian again, his twisted face, his sad eyes. He's trying to tell me something important. But I always wake before I can understand. Perhaps it's better that way. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some gateways should remain sealed. And some truths are better left unspoken. But I still check my rearview mirror more often than I used to. And I've started taking the main highways, avoiding back roads and remote deliveries. Because out there in the wilderness, in the spaces between known places, there are things that defy explanation, things that shouldn't exist, but do. And sometimes they find their way through.